So I'm sure you can't wait to begin this project together. But to start with, we've got to look at some of the rules, the principles that are going to guide us to doing this successfully. Now, as a general rule, design shouldn't decorate. It should be as simple as possible. The clearer you can convey a message to someone, the better you've done your job as a designer. But of course, there are occasions where that message has layers. And by using this layered approach, if you almost think of peeling back the layers of skin on an onion, as you dig deeper, you begin to see and to understand more and more. So a slightly more detailed logo, as long as it follows cardinal rules, is a great opportunity to convey something deeper about your client. Now, in most cases, you won't need to design something with this level of detail. It would be more powerful if you kept it simple. Now, why would I say that at the beginning to a class where we're looking at creating a detailed logo? Well, it's to make you aware you've got to use this sparingly. It can be very powerful, but you shouldn't be decorating. If you have an opportunity to add some added meaning to a design, and by adding these extra elements, you're actually creating something richer in meaning, while still being clear and recognizable, then by all means use these techniques. But realistically, this is a technique I'll use in maybe 20% of the identity projects I work on. For the other 80%, a simple approach is what's needed. So when something like this is needed, what are some of the rules and the principles that we need to be aware of? Now, one of the keys is that this needs to work with or without the finer details. And this is where I compare it to the responsive design approach that's so popular with web designers. So the problem for web designers, content needed to look as beautiful on a desktop screen as it would when it's shown on a much smaller mobile device. So how do web designers get around this? Have web designers simply dumbed down all content so that even if you visit a website on a desktop, you see something extremely simple just so that it works on a mobile device? Well, no, of course not. Sometimes they'll hide away non-essential elements on a mobile device. But ideally, they'll use responsive design. So they'll design a layout fluidly so that it collapses down and you're seeing the same information portrayed with perhaps a little less detail on a mobile device. But the messaging is the same. So what's the parallel for logo design and brand identity? Well, you need to ensure if you've added detail that the design works even if it's not clearly visible. So when you shrink the logo right down in size, are you missing anything essential? So if someone views your logo at a larger size, there's more intricate details they can appreciate. Does the design still work if it's shown at a smaller size, where those details perhaps can't be made out clearly? Is it still recognizable? Does it identify the brand? Now, to ensure this happens, we have to use something called visual hierarchy. And that means ensuring the key messages are unmissable at any size. They're clearly recognizable and they come across before anything else. But this also gives us the opportunity to add decorative elements that are further down the visual hierarchy, which enrich the brand, enrich the viewer's experience, but do nothing to distract from the key elements. And in fact, if this is done in the right way, it can actually make the brand more distinct and more immediately recognizable. And you'll see many examples of this in nature. If we take, for example, a tiger. Now, most of us will recognize a tiger by its stripes, which, when you look at them across the whole body of a tiger, it's a fairly complicated pattern. But if you looked at just the silhouette of a tiger, you'd still recognize it. Just from the outline, it's fairly recognizable. Add some more detail, add the stripes. Well, now it's clearly recognizable. Perhaps at first you could see it was a cat, but you weren't sure which cat. So in this example, a tiger's stripes are actually helping to identify it. And if you use decorative elements the right way, this can actually help identify your brand. And we'll look at a specific test we can do as we go through the step-by-step procedure just to make sure you're fitting your design within these boundaries and these rules. And I'll explain exactly how to do that. But although I've used the term decorative element, really it's an element with greater detail. It should never simply decorate. So we're going to ensure whatever elements you're adding to add some improved detail to this beautiful logo, it has meaning. And that way, as the client enjoys the design, the closer they see it, it's like peeling back the layers of an onion. They'll understand more and more about your brand, not simply be confused by something decorative that has no meaning. The vital principle of logo design is the sequence of cognition. So that's the order in which our brains identify things. Now, there's no two ways about it. The simpler something is, the faster our brains identify it. And that's powerful with logo design. So when we're adding an extra layer of detail or complexity, we've got to do it in such a way that we're not slowing or bogging that process down. There can be no confusion as to what someone's looking at. So at its core, even a detailed logo design will need something that's easily recognizable, that the brain can process as fast as possible. Our brains first identify shapes. The simpler the shape, the easier it is for us to comprehend. Next comes color. That's the next thing we immediately identify. And then finally comes the form. And within that form, some of the more intricate details, such as typography, we begin to recognize and try to read legible type. We'll also look for patterns, and humans are naturally pattern finders. We look for patterns in the things we see around us. So use the right way. Adding details that form an overall clear pattern, we can ensure we do as little as possible to slow down this sequence of cognition. In fact, if the details you're adding form an overall shape, it can actually increase the speed of cognition. So that's certainly an important design principle that we have to be aware of. It can be bent to some extent, but that principle should never be broken. Another fundamental design principle is that your logo, this identifies an entire brand. It has to be recognizable and it has to be memorable. Now, the simpler something it is, generally the easier it is to remember. But again, there are ways to bend this. So for example, the silhouette of a cat is very easy to remember. But when you add a pattern to that cat, detail, it becomes even easier to remember and even easier to identify. So we need to add the details in such a way that they make the overall logo more memorable, not less. Now, this does address a problem in modern brand identity, which is that so many people are using monograms and there are so many similar iterations now becoming mainstream. How would you ensure that a simple monogram letter looks clearly distinct from so many other versions out there? So adding an extra level of detail that isn't crucial to identify the brand, but it adds that extra depth, an extra layer of communication, and aids in identifying the logo. But that can actually be a useful advantage to employ. Now that we're aware of some of the rules and principles, and we'll keep coming back to these as we go through the future steps, let's get started. There's an art to this, but we need to create something that's going to work just as well when you shrink it right down in size.